There'll be many people watching this programme who are in exactly that position with nowhere to turn to.
I'd like to welcome Nicki Hari, who's joined us. You're a former opioid addict and now a counsellor. Do you recognise a lot of what was said?
100%. I mean, it's exactly, you put a bit of everyone's story and that makes up my story, my journey in addiction. There are some people that spoke on the film that were drug addicts and turning to synthetic opioids to boost their addiction, and other people that have been created drug addicts by their GPs, unfortunately.
Now, you say they have been created in that sense, but opioids are prescribed by GPs and doctors in general in order to deal with pain.
Correct. The problem is the GPs only have a 10-minute window, so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You know, that they see a patient that's coming in with acute pain that's probably measuring a 9 out of 10 for pain, and they want to try and help that person. So they prescribe them an opioid-based painkiller, but the person's not given the warnings. And they kind of slip through the net and end up being on a prescription medication for many, many years.
Does it work, though? Does it deal with the pain?
It does work. It does work. That's the problem. It does deal with the pain. But what comes with it is also a feeling of euphoria. It helps you sleep. It helps you relax. So when you're stressed during the day, which everyone gets, life stresses, it takes all that away, and you don't realise that actually what it's created is a cloud of safety.
What should be done?
I think there needs to be more looked into with regards to pain management. So if someone comes in with acute pain, yes, try them on a painkiller. Maybe start with paracetamol, Nurofen if it's still increased. An opioid for a very, very short period, and then use resources to have MRIs, X-rays, alternative medication, you know, or even having some sort of physiotherapy.
Is there a crisis of opioid addiction?
Just to say, I recognise a lot what you're saying. When I came back from Afghanistan, I was quite upset, and I found myself self-medicating with Valiums to sleep. And it was my doctor who actually took me off them. He said no and put me on alternative medication, Zopiclone, which helps you sleep in a different way. But I found that I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying. I think you can become dependent very easily.
Zopiclone is still very addictive.
And I came off that as well, but it's very addictive as well.
Did you become dependent on it?
I think not on... Well, I think, yeah, to sleep for a period, to sleep, because it was a very difficult time. So to sleep, definitely. And my initial route in was to try and go through... And I remember saying, can I have some more Valium, please?
Yes.
And he was like, no, I don't want you to have any more. And he put me on something else. But is there a crisis? Well, you know, we know in the US there is. And we know here that there may be the start of one or something that's growing. And to my mind, you can't take this away from politics, because if you look at the US...
You would say that.
And you look at the UK, two of the most unequal societies in the Western world, you've got, 40% child poverty, you've got in-work poverty, you've got the gig economy, you've got insecurity, and I think you cannot disconnect the two. That the more unequal the society have, the more unstable the society have, you have an increase in mental health issues, you have people taking tramadol and other... This is not just about physical pain. I think it's also about people's place in society and the stress of making ends meet and living. It's part of that.
It affects you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually and mentally. And, there's a whole umbrella of problems underneath that. And, that's what needs to be addressed.
Look, I completely accept that there are social problems. I was very struck by the fact that there was a regional disparity.
Well, that's
in terms
interesting, isn't it?
And that was very interesting. And I think that's something that we have as a government to do better.
And is Clive right, then, that there are pockets of deprivation where that could be higher?
There are pockets of deprivation. There are also pockets of deprivation, across the south as well. So these are vulnerable communities, and we have to do more to help. I think in terms of the northern... obviously, we've got the Northern Powerhouse, but I think in terms of investment in the North, making sure that economic growth is more evenly distributed across the UK, I think that's something that the government can focus on.
Power,
well, I mean, you're going to have a high tax agenda. I'm going to say
let's talk about the
we should grow the economy. We should grow the economy.
But it's an interesting underlying reason. If people are turning, anecdotally we're hearing that, are turning to using opioids in order to make life easier, to anaesthetise the pain, and may not always be physical.
So I was very interested in what Clive had to say when he returned from Afghanistan, because there are one or two people, certainly constituents of mine, who've been in the armed forces, who've had a very difficult time abroad, and when they come back, there are networks of support that they sometimes feel are lacking, and they can turn to drug use and abuse, and I think that's
very high with people that have been overseas that are suffering with PTSD. I mean, I now work for UKAT, where we take calls for people that are struggling with addiction, and we've seen like a 33% increase in people actually coming into treatment. And it is spreading across the country. It's not just pockets of areas anymore, and it's affecting people of all ages. I think there needs to be more awareness. Families need to be aware. And when it says on the packet, don't take longer than for 5 days, then listen to that.
And it's also pressures on the NHS, presumably, as well. What you were saying about doctors' appointments. Yeah. You need to be able to give GPs time to be with patients and figure out what the best plan is for them, and possibly more money for treatment centres, pain management centres that are away from GP centres.
I was just going to say, I mean, I've been in a campaign to try and save children's centres, which are being closed down through austerity in Norwich. And one of the key things that jumped out at me were the number of mothers who had postnatal depression who came to these centres and were helped and coached back out of that depression. And they're going now. So if they've got a 10-minute window to their GP, rather than the support they could have had from the children's centre, I can see the pathways which are narrowing, which lead them down potentially this path.
So I think I'm not going to make a political point on this. I think the main issue, the very interesting video, was there's very little awareness. There's very little knowledge out there in the public about some of these threats. And I think the way in which you can get addicted by a prescription is something which more people should be aware of, many more people.
Is politics really equipped to deal with these sorts of problems that go way beyond a GP surgery, for example? Is it the right place?
I think up to a point, politicians have a responsibility, but they're not responsible for all the social ills that affect the United Kingdom. I think politics has its role to play, but there are other forums as well. I mean, in my constituency, you've got churches, you've got network, you've got voluntary organisations. There are wider networks than just political leadership.
I mean, I disagree. I think the role of the state is to enable communities to have the time and the ability. I mean, if you think about people now are holding down 3 or 4 different jobs in a week, where do you find the time to be the support network to other people and to have support for yourself? If you're thinking constantly about the stress of, am I going to pay the rent? Am I going to be evicted? How am I going to pay for my children's new shoes? Am I going to have to go to the food bank? I mean, these things weigh on you. And also as well, if you think about the underpinning fabric of society, not just mental health and the NHS, but also the children's centres, the support for young people, youth services, all these things were part of that infrastructure that gave people that extra capacity for support. And it's disappeared over the last 10 years, and that's going to have an impact on on our society. What's your view about politics fixing this?
I think there needs to be some responsibility taken. As I say, for me, as the general public, we're not in the mindset of getting involved in Brexit, Labour, Conservative. We just want a solution. We're housewives, we're mums, we're working people that just want a solution, and we're reaching out and desperate for people to come and offer us a solution rather than just being put on opioid painkillers.
Nicki, thank you very much for coming in. Just before we go, I can bring you the news that the Dominic Grieve, the Conservative MP, his amendment that he had laid has not been selected, and that was an amendment to the Northern Irish bill, which would have been an attempt to stop anyone ruling, or rather trying to rule out no deal. Your reaction, very briefly. There are only 10 seconds, so maybe there's no time for reaction. I'm so sorry, but anyway, go on.
I think John Bercow is keeping his powder dry for the autumn.
And that's the Speaker. From all of us here, very goodbye and good afternoon.